So you might have noticed that I have been wearing the same lipstick and clothes, and I've been sitting in the same pose for quite a few videos now, and that's because I'm actually pre-recording a bunch of videos because I'm going to be in Ireland for a while and it'll be just harder for me to make videos for you guys and upload them and edit them and everything. So I'm trying to do as much as I can before I go. So that is why you're probably seeing this lipstick for the third time recently and you're going, this is familiar. Hi everyone. I made a 2-minute tarot video not too long ago with the intention of keeping up that habit, but today I actually kind of wanted to draw a couple of cards. Like I've drawn 3 cards actually, and talk about them because I wanted to make a slightly longer video, and I wanted to maybe see if I could get in the habit of drawing cards and using them to talk about spirituality and self-made spirituality specifically, and the issues and concerns that can arise through that, and yeah, just see if I can make a habit of it. I don't know, maybe it'll be a once-off, who knows. But the cards that I've drawn, and I will actually put in kind of cutaway to the 3 cards hopefully. So the 3 cards that I've drawn are the 4 of Swords and the Devil, great fun, and the Tower, and I drew them all inverted actually, but I just decided to just leave them all the right way up. A lot of the time if I get like a lot of cards inverted, I'll just kind of flip them up again, but then I'll like take it under consideration like when I'm interpreting them that they were actually inverted when I drew them. So yeah, it's quite a draw actually. Like these 3 cards together, it looks quite sinister. Like the 4 of Swords is one of those cards that in and of itself is quite neutral, and it just kind of reminds us of maybe taking a rest or what have you. But I think in connection with 2 such sort of quote-unquote negative cards as the Devil and the Tower, it takes on a much more sinister, like you definitely start to think of him maybe more as a body laid out to rest, or you know, laid out for his funeral, even though the hands are raised. But yeah, and that there's something, maybe a threat of the 3 swords above him, rather than him just kind of being in repose. But what these cards essentially made me think of was actually like spiritual stagnation and being in a spiritual rut. And this is something that I have talked about on and off quite a lot in the last couple of months, and immediately I was like, oh, do I really want to get into this again? It's something that I've talked about quite a lot already, but hey, I might as well see if I can chuck anything new out there. So that's how I'm going to interpret these cards. That's how I'm going to use them. I'm going to kind of use them as a springboard kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, first of all, that's kind of where I'm going with the 4 of Swords, is that quite literal kind of sense of stagnation, that he has kind of opted out. He's kind of, he's taking a rest, he's taking a break, and he's kind of maybe consolidating ideas and things like that. So I would say with this card, that it doesn't always have to be a bad thing that if you're going through a spiritual rut and just a period of spiritual stagnation, but to make it feel more of a positive thing and to stop yourself from panicking about it, a good thing is to think about it as a time of consolidation, and that you're taking this opportunity to think about where you're at in your spiritual journey, and to think about what's working and what's not working for you. And some very good advice that I believe that I had this advice from Kellyanne Maddox, was to, when you're going through a period of this kind of stagnation, and you know that when your spiritual cogs are just not turning, a good thing to do is to think back to the last time that your spiritual practice was really strong, and think about what it was that you were doing then and how you can maybe integrate that into your practice now. And yeah, in terms of this card, I would say, yeah, take the time, like take the time to think about what has been working for you previously. Have you lost anything that you used to be doing? Like, have you let anything slide that you could realistically reincorporate? But if you have let things slide, like sometimes maybe there's a reason for that, and sometimes you need to not necessarily hold on to those things, but you just need to kind of, you know, consider how those things have served you, and consider why it might be that they've kind of stalled for you. And yeah, just, I would say, journal a lot, or just think a lot. If journaling in and of itself seems to you like a spiritual practice, and sometimes that can go by the wayside with everything else. So if you can't bring yourself to journal, just think about it, you know, think about it on the bus, or when you're walking places, or doing housework, or doing chores. Just keep bringing yourself back to that question without kind of any blame, like without any pressure, and just thinking to yourself, you know, where am I at? Like, what have I been up to spiritually recently? And what is the last time that I felt like things were really strong for me? And how can I proceed from here? And what am I going to take with me? And what am I going to leave by the wayside? So the devil, kind of related, definitely a very strong sense of that stagnation, being stuck, not being able to progress, and maybe also just being in a bit of a rut and stuck with bad habits. So I would say with the devil, this is also speaking to me of like blame, and when you're kind of really putting a lot of pressure on yourself as well, actually, and getting into kind of like negative self-talk and things like that with regards to your spiritual practice, and the fact that you are not performing in the way that you would like to be, the fact that you're not keeping the commitments that you wanted to, and so on. So yeah, I would use the devil, and particularly I am again thinking of all of these kind of as being inverted slightly in my head as well. I would definitely think of the devil in this context as being a reminder, yeah, to not self-blame, to not get into negative self-talk, and to not think of this as some big terrible thing that's happening to you, and kind of turning it into this kind of failure, a failure of character, or that, you know, you've failed yourself in some way. But instead to try and remind yourself and get back into, again, returning to that question of what is it that used to bring you joy with your spiritual practice, but then maybe more to the point, what will bring you joy now? And yeah, instead of maybe trying to make everything about spiritual practice all the time, actually just try and engage in activities that are joyful for you in general. Because the devil is not just about kind of being a prisoner and being held captive to, you know, negative patterns and negative cycles and things like that. Like, if this is how you're feeling with your spiritual practice, and it's really that stale and stagnant, and that it feels like this kind of like just like really dull and painful kind of drudgery, then I think, you know, the devil is also associated with hedonism, with just sort of living a very kind of sumptuous and a really kind of sensual life, reminding yourself of what it is that brings you joy, and in a very kind of carnal way. And I think that can be a really good way as well of getting out of a spiritual rut and getting yourself out of that feeling of obligation, and when you're kind of caught up in knots thinking, oh, I want to be doing this, but I really don't want to be doing it. Well, then don't do it, and actually just focus instead on doing things that bring you joy. So yeah, don't just like let yourself be this guy and do nothing whatsoever, and just, you know, sit back on your laurels whenever you have the time. That you could be doing other things, and just, you know, veg out and watch Netflix and just kind of zone out completely. Actually be kind of proactive about doing things that are really joyful for you, doing things that get you moving, that get you active, that get you creative in other ways, but just in ways that are currently joyful for you, that make you feel energetic, that make you feel alive. And no judgment about what those things might be. Absolutely no judgment. And if it seems to you like, if you're thinking to yourself like, I really just feel like doing this right now, but that's just really not spiritual at all, so it's not helping me with the spiritual problem, don't worry about it. Like, if that just looks like going out on a night out with your friends, and spending more time with your friends and stuff in general, well, absolutely do that, because there could just be something that you need to be expressing in your life right now that you're not expressing. And I think letting yourself actually express joy and express your just desire for life through different avenues can actually be a good way to shake yourself out of that rut as well. And then finally we have the Tower. The Tower inverted for me is very, very strongly connected to finding your roots, and looking at the situation and thinking, well, if everything is actually stripped away, if the tower falls, if everything is destroyed, if I pull everything back, if everything gets taken away from me, what am I left with? So in this situation with spiritual practice, I suppose it is, I mean, maybe everything has already been stripped away for you. Maybe you've already kind of had that tower moment. of just feeling disillusioned with everything that you've been doing spiritually, and maybe your ritual has just completely ground to a halt. Maybe you are just not actually practicing at all. Maybe even your beliefs have, I don't know, maybe they've kind of fallen by the wayside a bit as well. Maybe they've been shaken up, maybe you've been questioning them. And I think that going with the flow with this is important, and not resisting that is important. And, you know, I think balance that, sure, with things like spending time thinking about, you know, what it is that actually evokes a sense of spirituality for you right now, and what it was that you were doing the last time that you were feeling spiritually centered, and then also doing the things that make you feel joy, and so on and so forth, and staying away from that kind of haranguing yourself and harassing yourself for not doing spirituality. But also with the tower inverted, it's just that kind of sense of sometimes you need to accept, and I know I've said this in a previous video about spiritual stagnation and getting into spiritual ruts instead as well, spiritual ruts as well, is that, you know, sometimes you really just need to accept that what's gone is gone, and you need to accept that maybe some of the old practices, that they don't need to be carried into the future necessarily either. But it's a kind of a positive card in that it's reminding you to go back to your roots and to go back to the basics. And I think that can actually be a really, really valuable lesson. And what I have found personally is that once I got to that point of accepting that things had fallen apart for me, and that I maybe was never going to practice ritual in the same way again, I maybe never was going to have a relationship with the Morrigan again, I maybe never was going to have the same kind of beliefs that I had held, and maybe this was just how it was going to be for me. Like, once I kind of came to that acceptance, I was able to look at myself and say, well, what's left then? You know, what are you actually left with? What are you still holding on to? And once I started building off that again, like once I just swept everything else to one side and said, okay, maybe that's gone completely, and actually started building on that foundation again, and went back to those sources, went back to those things that had once been just so inspiring to me and so on, I found myself almost organically over time building it back up again. And I've actually found myself back in a place where I don't have a devotional relationship with the Morrigan right now, but actually I think I probably will in the future. And I don't necessarily hold the exact same beliefs that I did at one point, but actually they're looking more and more similar to what they used to. And it has actually gradually kind of come back into play. It has actually all kind of almost by itself just reassembled itself. Just because I had to go back to the basics and build it up from there. And I think then you have a stronger foundation. I think if you do end up in that kind of tower moment where everything gets ripped away and ripped to shreds, and you feel really lost and stuck and scared, and like maybe all of this has just been an illusion and it's never going to be the same again, I think actually that can be a gift. And having to come back to those foundations and build them up and strengthen them, and really say to yourself, like, come on, like, be serious with yourself, be honest with yourself. Why is it I'm doing this? Like, what is it? What is it about reality that makes me want to be a spiritual person? And building that up over time is really, really valuable, and really strengthens your faith, your practice, and all of that. That's how it seems to be working for me. And yeah, maybe my practice won't look the same again, and maybe it'll go in different directions, and that's okay. But like I said, I've surprised myself with how much of it really has come back. And you know, hey, I've drawn tarot cards. I haven't drawn many tarot cards since I moved to Edinburgh, but I don't for a minute think that it's not going to be part of my future. I think sometimes you just need to get back to the basics and let everything else happen.